video, we're going to go over the KutaSoftware Infinite PreAlgebra free worksheet, solving one-step inequalities by adding or subtracting. Now, our directions for this worksheet are to solve each inequality and graph its solution. Now, as you can see, we're dealing with one variable inequalities right now. So because we're dealing with one variable inequalities, we're going to be able to graph that on a single number line. And solving these one-step inequalities is very similar to solving one-step equations. What we're going to do is isolate that variable. So let's dive in with number 1. In number 1, we have x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 18. We need to isolate our variable x, and how we do that is we're going to move this 8 to the other side. Now, because the 8 is added, we're going to need to subtract it in order to get rid of it. A positive 8 minus 8 will give us 0. Now, whatever we do to one side of our inequality, we need to do to the other side as well, just like an equation. So we're going to subtract 8 from this side as well. So again, 8 minus 8 goes to 0. So we're left with just x on our left-hand side of our inequality, and on our right-hand side, 18 minus 8 is going to be 10. So we're going to have that x is greater than or equal to 10. And remember, for greater than or less than, if it has this line underneath, that means it could also be equal to that value. So we have x is greater than or equal to 10. Now we're going to graph it. Where we're going to start is we're going to find 10 on our number line, which is right here. And we're going to draw a circle around it. Now, because this is greater than or equal to, that means that x can be equal to 10, so we're going to fill this circle in. If it was just a greater than, we would leave the circle open, representing that x could not be 10, only values greater than it. But because it can be equal to it, we're going to draw that circle around the 10 and fill it in. Now, x is greater than or equal to 10. If x is greater than or bigger than that value of 10, that means that x could be 11, 12, or 13, because 11 is bigger than 10, 12 is bigger than 10, 13 is bigger than 10, and not only could it be those whole number values, but it can be everything in between, all of those fractions in between as well. So we're going to draw a line, shading in all these possible values, and it can continue on, because 14 is also bigger than or equal to 10, and so is 100. 100 is greater than or equal to 10. So we're going to also shade that arrow. And there we have it. That's our answer in number 1. Now, if you're just starting out, something that I find helpful is to think about Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man as that inequality. So drawing this around them. They are going to be eating that larger value. So because they're eating the x, that x is larger than that 10. So that's just a helpful hint when figuring out these inequalities. Let's move on to number 2. In number 2, we have x minus 1 is greater than 6. What do? We need to isolate x. And because this 1 is subtracted, we're going to add it. And just like with an equation, we need to add it to both sides. Negative 1 plus 1, that's a 0. So we have x remaining on our left-hand side. Our symbol is a greater than symbol. And then we have 6 plus 1, which is 7. So right now we have x is greater than 7. Again, thinking about that Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, it's going to want to eat that x, so x is greater than 7. It always wants to eat that higher value. But let's first start by locating 7, which is right here on the number line, and we're going to draw a circle around it. Now, are we going to shade this circle in? No, because it's not greater than or equal to, it's only greater than. So if x is greater than 7, that's values to the right of 7, because that represents values that are larger. So we're shading everything to the right. Let's move on to number 3. In number 3, we have negative 7 plus x is greater than or equal to negative 8. What we're going to do, in order to isolate this x, we have a negative 7, so we're going to add 7 to both sides of our equation. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0, so we have x is greater than or equal to negative 8 plus 7 is going to be a negative 1. Again, starting with that value of negative 1, we're going to locate it on the number line and circle it. Now, x is greater than or equal to, so we know that because x can be the value of -1, we're going to shade -1 in. And then now, finally, x represents values that are greater than or equal to, so that's values to the right of -1, bigger than -1, so that's 0, 1, 1/2, and so on. Let's move on to number 4. In number 4, we have x minus 1 is less than or equal to 3. So let's start by isolating x, and we're going to do so by adding 1 to both sides. So we're going to get x left on our left-hand side, and that's going to be less than or equal to a positive 4. Starting with finding 4 on our number line, we're going to circle it, and what else are we going to do? We're going to shade it in because x can be equal to 4. But this time, x is values that are less than or equal to 4. If you notice, if we were to draw that Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, it wants to eat those larger values. It wants to eat 4. So 4 is going to be our rightmost value. That means we're going to be shading everything to the left of it, everything less than it. So here are my potential x values. Let's move on to number 5. In number 5, n minus 2 is less than or equal to 4. Well, our variable in this problem is n as opposed to x, but we solve it the same way. We're going to be adding 2 to both sides since this 2 is negative, since it's subtracted. So -2 plus 2 is 0 to leave me with our variable n, which is less than or equal to 4 plus 2, which is 6. Again, starting with locating 6, we'll circle it. N can be equal to that 6, so we'll shade it in. But it also represents values that are less than that. So we're going to shade all our values to the left because 5 is less than 6, 2.5 is less than 6, 1.5 is less than 6, and so on. N is less than or equal to 6. In number 6, our variable is v. This time, we're going to be adding a positive 1 to both sides. That's going to leave me with v on my left-hand side of my inequality, which is less than 3 plus 1, which is 4. Locating the 4, we're going to circle it, but we're not going to shade it in because this is less than. It's strictly less than. It's not less than or equal to. So 4 cannot be v, but it can be any value less than it. So we're going to be shading to the left. Let's move on to number 7. For number 7, we have -18 plus n is less than -7. Well, again, we need to isolate n. This is a one-step inequality, which means we're going to do one simple step. We're going to add 18 to both sides. In doing so, -18 plus 18 goes to 0. That helps me isolate my n, or get it all by itself. And n is going to be less than -7 plus 18 is going to be a positive 11. Now all we have to do is graph it. Find 11, circle it. We're not going to shade it in because it's strictly less than, and then we're going to shade everything to the left since n represents values less than 11. And there we have it. That was number 7. For number 8, r plus 13 is less than 9. What are we going to start with? We're going to start by subtracting 13 from both sides. That will help us isolate r. So getting r all by itself, we have that r is less than 9 minus 13, which is a -4. Now, locating -4 and circling it, r is everything less than it, so shading to the left. And what are we not doing? We're not filling that circle in because it's less than, not less than or equal to. Let's move on to number 9. In number 9, n minus 4 is greater than or equal to 13. How we're going to go about this is simply adding 4 to both sides. So that isolates my n. So I get n on my left-hand side, and that's going to be greater than or equal to 13 plus 4 is 17. Locating the 17 on my number line, circling it, and also filling it in because n can be equal to 17. But now when we draw the rest of those values in greater than or equal to 17, that means all the values to the right of 17. And including 17. Let's move on to number 10. In number 10, we have p plus 8 is greater than a negative 4. One step, we're just going to subtract 8 from both sides. When doing that, we isolate our variable p, and that's going to be greater than negative 4 minus 8. We're going further into the negatives, that's going to be a negative 12. Locating negative 12, circling it, but not shading it in, p is greater than it, so we're going to shade all the values to the right. In number 11, 17 plus k is less than or equal to 10. All I'm going to do is subtract 17 from both sides. Once we do that, we isolate k. K is now all by itself on one side of our inequality. So we get that k is going to be less than or equal to 10 minus 17 is going to be a negative 7. Find that negative 7, circle it, and what are we going to do? We're also going to shade it in, and then k is less than or equal to, so that's all the values to the left, or negative 7 itself. In number 12, negative 2 plus x is less than or equal to negative 16. One step, we're going to be adding 2 to both sides. Negative 2 plus 2 gives me 0. 0 plus x is x. And we have the x is less than or equal to negative 16 plus 2. That's going to be a negative 14. Finding that on the number line, we'll circle it and we'll also shade it in. Now x is values less than or equal to that, so we're going to be shading negative 14 and everything to the left. So for number 13, we have a negative 28 is less than b minus 16. On this page, we're switching things up just a little bit right away because you can see that our variable is no longer on our left-hand side, but on our right-hand side of the equation. But that's okay, we're just going to isolate it. Do so by adding 16 to both sides. Because that 16 was subtracted, I can cancel it out through addition. Negative 28 plus 16 is going to be a negative 12. So we're going to get negative 12 is less than v. Now, go about this the same exact way. We're going to locate negative 12 on the number line, circle it. So because negative 12 is less than v, we need to shade all those values to the right. Think about writing this inequality a different way. If negative 12 is less than v, that means that v is greater than negative 12. All those values greater than negative 12 or all the values shaded to the right. And I can write this inequality this way or this way. Either is fine. All I did here is, just like an equation, if we were to have, let's say, 3 equals x, I can simply say x equals 3, right? We can switch those. They mean the same thing. You can do that with an inequality, but there's one important step. You need to make sure that if you do switch the sides, you need to also switch the way your inequality is facing. So negative 12 represents values less than v. So when I switch those sides, that means that v represents those values that are bigger than or greater than negative 12. Again, referring back to that Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, you can see that it wants to eat the v is that bigger value, and right below, same exact thing. It wants to eat the v is that bigger value. Let's move on to number 14. Moving on to number 14, n minus 2 is greater than negative 20. Simply add 2 to both sides. When we do that, we get that n is greater than a negative 18. So we're going to circle that negative 18. We're not going to shade it in, and n is all the values to the right, since n is greater than negative 18. For number 15, x minus 7 is less than negative 20. We're going to start by adding 7 to both sides and get that x is less than negative 20 plus 7 is going to be a negative 13. So we're going to locate negative 13 and circle it. Once we circle it, we're going to shade in all the values that are less than negative 13. So that's all the values to the left, not filling that circle in because it's not a less than or equal to. Let's move on to number 16. Number 16, x plus 13 is greater than or equal to 5. So subtracting 13 from both sides, we're going to get that x is greater than or equal to 5 minus 13, which is a negative 8. So locating negative 8 on our number line, we're going to circle it, and we're also going to shade it in and shade all the values to the right, because x is greater than or equal to negative 8. For number 17, x minus 10 is greater than a negative 1. We're going to add 10 to both sides in order to isolate that x. So x minus 10 plus 10 equals x, and that's going to be greater than negative 1 plus 10, which is a 9. You could think about this as 10 minus 1. That's going to be a 9. So we're going to locate 9, circle it, don't shade it in, but shade everything to the right, since x represents those values greater than 9. For number 18, x minus 12 is less than negative 11. So we're going to add 12 to both sides right at the start. Doing so, we isolate our variable x and get that x is less than, well, negative 11 plus 12, 12 minus 11, that's a positive 1. So if x is less than 1, we're going to circle 1, not shading in that circle, but shading everything to the left since x is less than 1. Moving right along to number 19, simply add 2 to both sides to get that r is greater than 13. Circling that 13 and then shading everything to the right since r is values greater than 13, which would be 14, 15, 16, 99, 15.5, and so on. For number 20, 9 plus n is greater than negative 4. Subtract 9 from both sides at the start. So we get n is greater than negative 4 minus 9. We're going further into the negatives, so that's going to be a negative 13. Now locate that negative 13 and circle it on our number line. Now we're going to shade everything to the right since n represents values greater than that negative 13. And there we have it. For number 21, 20 is greater than or equal to p plus 16. Start by subtracting 16 because remember we want to isolate our variable, which in this case is p. 20 minus 16 gives me a positive 4, and we have that 4 is greater than or equal to p. Now if we want to, remember we can rewrite this. We can say that p is less than or equal to 4. As long as we have that inequality facing the correct direction. In other words, when we switch up the sides of our inequality, we need to flip the inequality. But notice that it still wants to eat that larger value of 4. So p is less than or equal to 4, or 4 is greater than or equal to p. All we got to do, locate 4, shade it in, and p would be values to the left. From this inequality, we know that 4 is the largest value. 4 is greater than or equal to p, so we don't want to shade to the right. We want to shade to the left. And from this, we know that p is less than or equal to 4, so we're going to shade all those values less than or equal to it. Just a couple different ways to think about these problems. Let's move on to number 22. In number 22, we'll start by subtracting 8. When we subtract 8 from both sides, 11 minus 8 gives us a positive 3, and that's going to be greater than or equal to our variable n. So I'm going to start by locating 3, circling it, shading it in, and 3 is greater than or equal to n, so 3 is that largest value n is going to be, so I'm shading everything to the left. N is less than or equal to 3. In number 23, 6 is greater than negative 11 plus a. My variable a is on my right hand side, and I'll just keep it there, and I'll move this 11 over to the other side. Now when I add 11 to both sides, I get 17 on my left hand side is greater than my variable a. So I'm going to locate 17 on my number line, circle it, and a is all the values that is smaller or less than 17 because 17 is greater than a. So I'm going to shade everything to the left of 17, remembering not to shade that circle in, because 17 is strictly greater than a, not greater than or equal to. In 24, my variable p, I'm subtracting 6 from it, so in order to isolate it, I'll add 6 to both sides. So I'll get that p is greater than or equal to negative 3 plus 6, or 6 minus 3, which is a positive 3. Finding 3 on my number line, circling it, shading it in, and then p represents all those values greater than or equal to, so that's all the values to the right and 3. In number 25, we have in minus 83 is greater than negative 166. Start by adding 83 to both sides. Again, these are just one-step equations, so even though we have a lot larger values we're working with in number 25, we go through the same steps. So we isolate our variable in, and that's going to be greater than negative 166 plus 83. So now this negative 166 plus 83 is going to be a little tricky to do in our heads, so let's break this up. Let's break negative 166 up into negative 100 plus a negative 60 plus a negative 6, and let's break 83 up into a positive 80 plus a 3. I know this looks like a lot more work, but if you're struggling mentally to do this out, just write out the hundreds, tens, and ones, and then combine them doing such. So negative 100, there's not another 100 to combine it with, so I'll leave it as negative 100. Now, negative 60 plus 80, think about taking 80 and subtracting 60. That's going to leave me with a positive 20. And this negative 6 plus 3 is going to leave me with a negative 3. So now these numbers look a little bit easier to work with than those two over here. Negative 100 plus 20 is going to give us a negative 80. So if we have negative 80 plus a negative 3, that's just a negative 83. So sometimes breaking these numbers up, it's easier to do the math out than trying to do this all in our heads. So negative 83 is what in is greater than. In is greater than a negative 83. So we're going to circle negative 83, and we're going to shade everything to the right, because in represents values greater than that negative 83. Moving on to the last problem on this worksheet, number 26. For number 26, we have negative 3 is greater than or equal to x plus 16. All we're going to do is subtract 16 from both sides. So negative 3 minus 16, we're going further into the negative, so that's going to be a negative 19, which is greater than or equal to x. Locating negative 19 on our number line, circling it, x represents all the values that are less than or equal to negative 19, since negative 19 is greater than or equal to x. So we're going to shade it in and fill out all the values to the left. And there we have it. That's our last solution on this free KutaSoftware website worksheet. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. All likes and subscriptions are greatly appreciated. Happy learning!